not singling out the OVP or the DepEd. To my mind, I cannot justify, given the definition, that the following should be getting intelligence fund and confidential funds.
Hindi ko ma-justify sa mind ko talaga. Kung ako, I could have lived with a zero confidential fund for the office of the Vice President. Yung iba siguro nakikita nila that it can be justified. So please ask them ano yung justification na namuo sa kanilang mga isipan.
Mayroon po tayong mga ahensyang mas nangangailangan ng pondo para sa surveillance at ibang programa para sa seguridad ng bansa, tulad ng ating advokasya para sugpuin ang human trafficking at OSAEC.
From the nation's capital, all sides, all the time, I'm Ed Lingao.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. The big story tonight.
The Senate has realigned some 170 million pesos worth of intelligence funds of different agencies as it approves the version of the proposed 5.268 trillion peso national budget for next year.
However, the Office of the President's 4.5 billion peso confidential funds, as well as the OVP's 500 million peso CIF, were left untouched. Mayan Los Baños with the big story.
At this point, I would like to make
Before the 2023 national budget was passed on second and third reading during last night's session, the Senate minority did not give up easily on its mission to delete or at least realign the Confidential and Intelligence Funds or CIF of some key government offices. Senate Minority Leader Coco Pimentel and Senator Risa Ontiveros insist that agencies with no mandate to do surveillance or intelligence gathering should not be given a chunk of CIF.
I'm not singling out the OVP or the DepEd. No? To my mind, I cannot justify, given the definition, that the following should be getting intelligence fund and confidential funds.
mayroon po tayong mga ahensyang mas nangangailangan ng pondo para sa surveillance.
Before the 2023 national budget was passed in the Senate, Senate Finance Committee Chairman Sonny Angara gave in to some requests of the minority bloc. He allowed the realignment of 100 million pesos out of the 150 million peso confidential funds of DepEd. This budget was reallocated to the agency's maintenance and other operating expenses or MOOE. Hontiveros even pushed on to realign the remaining 50 million confidential funds to the agency's Health Learners Institution program. But Senator Angara offered another compromise.
Perhaps we could leave a 30 million balance and realign the 20 million to your stated purpose. So as we don't have to put our colleagues on the spot, Madam Chair.
Around 172 million peso CAF for different agencies was realigned to their MOOE. This includes the 5 million pesos from DFA, 19.2 million pesos from the DOJ, 2 million pesos from the DSWD, 6 million pesos from other executive offices, and 20 million pesos from the Ombudsman. Pimentel said the only agencies deserving of CIF are those with mandate for law and order and security of the country. He agrees that the Office of the President should have confidential funds, but questions why there are separate intel funds for the OP. But the Office of the President's 4.5 billion peso and the OVP's 500 million peso confidential funds were untouched. The House and Senate contingents will try to reconcile their versions of the budget in the Bicameral Conference Committee tomorrow. Pimentel says there's still a chance that there will be some decrease in the CIF depending on the decision of the BICAM members. Reporting for News 5, Mayan Los Baños, we are One News.
Well, it's interesting that Senator Coco Pimentel is banking on the possibility that they can still decrease the intelligence and confidential funds in the BICAM. Because, of course, they're also talking, half of the BICAM is from Congress. And Congress, of course, wants to give them the entirety of what DBM gave them.
Well, I guess one of the things that were stark to me that the whole budget of the intel funds for the Office of the President, Office of the Vice President were still intact. And it was just the DepEd fund that they were able to realign. So what would be the mechanisms in holding our offices and these departments, agencies accountable for how they spend the funds?
Actually, it's spelled out in a joint circular in 2015. Pero even then, even in the joint circular, there are so many loopholes because it's an intelligence fund. So
Intelligence funds, is there any sort of accounting, auditing?
There is, in the sense that there is a special unit tasked by the COA. I forget the name of it. It's a long acronym. tasked with the, with auditing CONFI and intelligence funds. But even then, the amount of auditing that they can do, of course, is limited by the amount of documents that will be provided or that is required to be submitted. And it doesn't. In that joint circular, there's not much in terms of documentation that's required. Kasi it's a confidential intelligence funds. So,
Well, in contrast to that, pag nalipat na yan sa MOOE, which is the operating expenses,
then they will have to
yun na,
break it down
itemized.
in the auditing.
But as you mentioned, the fight is not yet over for the minority bloc. It still will go through Congress and the BICAM.
Yeah, and you never know if the House gets its way. Anyway, in other news, more than 200 people deprived of liberty or persons deprived of liberty have been released from Bilibid prison. Josh Camo with the story.
The Bureau of Corrections released 234 persons deprived of liberty or PDLs on Thursday. One of the PDLs, Ben, got emotional as he talked to his family over the phone. Michelle, on the other hand, says she spent 8 years of her life inside the New Bilibid prison and her release is the best Christmas gift she can imagine.
8 years na ako mahigit na wala eh. Kaya babawi ako.
Namiss niyo ba yung mga anak mo?
Sobra. Kasi kung ano eh, hindi ko sila nalagaan. Yung pag-stay ko ng correctional, dapat sa kanila ko, maalagaan ko sila, magabayan ko.
Meanwhile, Joe is relieved to finally taste freedom. He says 13 years in Bilibid is very difficult for a person with disability like him.
Mahirap sir kasi yung mga pamilya na wala sa kapiling. Lalo na sa amin na may kapansanan. Saka yung pagdating malayo sa dalaw.
Of the 234 PDLs, 12 are acquitted, 106 are paroled, 112 has finished their sentence, and 2 were put on probation. During the ceremony, the PDLs received their release orders. They were given money for fare as well.
Ngayong araw na to, hindi na kayo persons deprived of liberty. Kayo po ay malaya na. Malaya na inyong puso, malaya na yung pag-iisip at malaya na rin ang paghihirap ninyo.
Katapang says the ceremony is part of the reforms in Bilibid. The Bureau of Corrections is already coordinating with their families for a safe return home. Meanwhile, Justice Secretary Boying Rimulya plans to improve jail system in the country. Rimulya says he will coordinate with the Executive Secretary for PDLs to be given clemency.
Well, I will talk to the Executive Secretary in this first week of December to have a dialogue with him about all the recommendations for clemency. I think that we might arrive at around 600 clemencies already by the time that December comes in.
For News 5, Josh Camo, We Are One News.
Right after the break, we will talk about the DICT transferring 1.1 billion pesos of their funds to the MMDA for the free public Wi-Fi program, allegedly without the consent of Congress. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here in One News.
Forced labor in China contains a loophole, and Shein, the Chinese fast fashion giant, is slipping through it. Bloomberg News had these Shein garments tested in a lab, and it found that they were made with cotton from China's Xinjiang region. The U.S. government's banned cotton imports from Xinjiang last year and considers all products from there to be made with forced labor. The United Nations has said China's treatment of the Uyghur people, who are predominantly Muslim, may constitute crimes against humanity. The U.S. ban sent American retailers into a frenzy to prove that they don't source cotton from Xinjiang. But Shein has fallen under the radar due to what's called the de minimis trade exemption. Individual shipments to customers fall below the $800 value threshold that triggers reporting requirements to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, meaning Shein avoids the scrutiny applied to bulk imports. In a statement, Shein didn't deny that the cotton comes from Xinjiang, but said it has taken steps to ensure they comply with local laws and regulations. The crackdown presents a challenge. Acknowledging its cotton comes from Xinjiang would risk alienating consumers, Denying it would risk angering China's government, which rejects allegations of forced labor, saying they're only jobs creations programs. For U.S. policymakers, Shein's position demonstrates the limits of government attempts to keep the products of forced labor out of the domestic market. Shein is on track to sell $8 billion worth of clothing in the U.S. this year, about a third of its business worldwide. Labor activists and U.S. apparel retailers are calling for more awareness of the company's labor practices and for Congress and the administration to act.
You're watching The Big Story here in One News. The MMDA insists that the transfer of funds from the DICT is above board. Acting MMDA Chairman Romando Artes said this in response to the privileged speech by Congressman Paul Daza. Daza questioned some 3 billion pesos were transferred from the DICT to the MMDA, a transaction that he calls highly suspicious. The amount was supposedly taken from the DICT's 12 billion peso budget for the free Wi-Fi program.
This is an example of what we call an interagency transfer. But this one in particular doesn't seem to have clear guidance from Congress, which is mandated to enact the General Appropriations Act, making this transaction or this interagency transfer or MOA agreement highly suspicious, if not illegal.
For his part, Artes says that the MMDA only wants to help the DICT in implementing the National Broadband Project. Artes also clarified that only around 1 billion pesos were transferred to the MMDA. He adds that having a role in the project could also help speed up plans for a single ticketing system.
Ang pagda-download, ang interagency transfer of funds ay hindi po pinagbabawal, hindi po to suspicious or illegal. Ang pagta-transfer po ay normal na ginagawa among agencies dahil kami po ay nagtutulungan sa pag-implementa ng mga projects ng bawat isa.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization warns that measles is now an imminent global threat as COVID-19 caused a steady decline in vaccination coverage. Here in the Philippines, the health department is raising the alarm over a possible measles outbreak come next year. Jenny Dongon with the details.
Health workers in Barangay San Andres, Cainta, Rizal went house to house to convince parents to let their children get the anti-measles shot. But Catherine, a mother of a 2-year-old child, refused for the third time. Catherine explained that she's afraid of what might be the side effect of the measles vaccine to her child.
Baka kasi ma'am, di po makayanan po kasi niya yung yung ituturok po kasi sa kanya. Kasi payat po kasi yun talaga, mapayat po yun.
Catherine's child is just only one among 2 million children aged 0 to 23 months old that have not yet inoculated. The health department raised alarm over these figures as it could lead to an outbreak of vaccine-preventable diseases like measles. The DOH announced that all regions in the Philippines are at a high risk for a measles outbreak in 2023 due to low vaccine coverage. With this, the agency has intensified its immunization efforts to protect children from such diseases.
Kailangan natin maintindihan yung pagbabakuna. Binibigyan po ng bakuna ang ating mga kabataan so that we can prevent these diseases.
According to the World Health Organization, measles vaccination coverage has steadily declined since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Last 2021, over 40 million children around the globe missed the measles vaccine.
9 million cases and 128,000 deaths from measles were recorded worldwide. This 2022, the threat of a global measles outbreak is considered as an imminent one.
The WHO explained that while vaccines against COVID-19 were developed and given more attention, immunization programs for children were badly disrupted. The WHO has urged national and local levels to prioritize efforts to immunize all unprotected children. For News 5, Jenny Dongon, We Are One News.
And right after the break, the Philippines sends a note verbal to China after the encounter with the Chinese Coast Guard along Pagasa Island. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here in One News.
Hardest part for me as somebody being on the organization side of layoffs is that you know that people's lives are at stake, and if you are an empathetic person, which I, for better or worse, am, you can't help but think about the impact that this is going to have on the people who have a job one day and not the next day.
This is Camilla Boyer. She had the misfortune of working at 3 companies in the space of 9 months that did layoffs. While there is definitely not a good way of firing people, there is absolutely a bad way.
There's 3 really important things to bear in mind. First of all, don't fire a mass number of people over Zoom or over email. Don't diminish their contributions to the company. Make sure you're showing gratitude for the time and effort and love, in lots of cases, that people have put into their jobs at that company. It's much harder to trust a leader who isn't capable of owning their own fallibility than it is to trust one who will own up to their mistakes and be willing to kind of take that on board and move forward. Accountability, empathy, closure. It's really important to treat the people who are being laid off with that respect, giving the people impacted a chance to say goodbye, treating them in that human way and not just cutting them off from every system right away goes a long way towards the experience of both the people who are leaving and the people who are remaining in terms of that ability to move on.
Climate change is a very complex issue. If you go deep enough and you learn enough about it, it becomes very personal. When I was young, I was originally a surfer. The inception of all of this environmental activism came from a particular instance that I'd asked my parents about why I couldn't go surfing when it rained. And that was because all of the pollution runs down from the land into the ocean, and you can get like an ear infection, that sort of thing. And it was a breakthrough moment for me as a kid, knowing that what I did on land had an impact so far away that it made itself present in the ocean and changed that to a degree where you couldn't go in it because it was slightly dangerous. And that opened my eyes to a lot of different environmental catastrophes happening. I was learning about what the contributing factors are and how it's going to be affecting us. Coinciding with this, I had just got on a television show and I started to amass this following on social media, and I was in a position to share that. It's a very big issue, and because of that, a lot of people sort of get spooked by that, almost like it's a lot to take in and you feel quite small and like you can't do anything. I don't try and be perfect, but just do like one thing a day that makes a difference, and that could be as simple as like sharing this type of info through social media. Meatless Mondays was one I started doing back in 2016.
So try Meatless Mondays and be part of the Racing Extinction Challenge to save our planet.
Act Now has always been a big one, but really Trees with Aiden is the thing I've been pushing recently, and that's a big tie into what we're here for today, which is electric racing. We're getting people to take climate pledges, and because of that, Envision Racing will plant a free tree, which is amazing. You learn about
You're still watching The Big Story here in One News. And here to talk to us about the transfer of funds between the DICT and the MMDA, we have with us on the line Northern Samar Congressman Paul Daza. Sir, magandang gabi and welcome to The Big Story.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, sir. Sir, well, start off with the basics. Pwede bang gawin yun na ang isang agency, isang departamento maglipat ng 1 bilyon mahigit sa ibang departamento just like that?
In my opinion, that's not legal. Even if it was legal, there has to be more transparency. Kaya kinall out ko yan dahil it seems to be a bad pattern na yung mga agencies naglilipatan ng pondo, di ba? Under the law, ang budget nila, appropriations yan eh.
Yes, sir.
Like in this case, DICT. Dapat mag-implement kung yung nung project, like in this case, part ng free public Wi-Fi, fiber optics, DICT, walang kinakaalam doon ng MMDA. Bakit nila tinransfer? Diba? Yun ang issue doon. Hindi naman kailangan i-transfer, bakit ita-transfer? Sa MMDA na ang jurisdiction nila is traffic, waste management, traffic management, diba? Metro Manila. Bakit DICT nagbibigay ng pondo sa kanila?
Congressman, have you identified where these funds were used, the 1.1 billion pesos? Is it under the same project of the free public Wi-Fi?
That's what I wanted to find out because there's no transparency even in the bidding. MMDA wanted to bid the project. Dun sa what you call the bid documents, ang description ng funding is it came from a trust account, walang specifics. So that's why I did a privilege speech because that's the job of Congress, diba? Oversight. So I called that out to get more details na bakit ganon. In fact, it's not just MMDA. There's at least 2 or 3 other transfer of funds to other agencies from DICT. And this all happened, in fairness, last year. No, it didn't happen this year. From what I know, last year pa yan.
Yes, sir. Well, sir, I'll go back to my earlier question kasi nga, Congress does not just have oversight, it also has the power of the purse. Ibig sabihin, Congress gets to decide which agency gets how much. And it's not up to the executive to decide who gets what. Hindi ba? And that's why we had the Supreme Court ruling on the DAP during the time of President Aquino.
Correct. I pretty much I agree. You know, that's why I think it's illegal, and at a minimum, it's immoral, unethical, to be transferring funds to other departments when the law which Congress passed, which is the budget law, we appropriated the funds, in this case, DICT. Bakit napunta sa MMDA? Di ba medyo allergic na tayo pag ang mga pondo linilipat-lipat kung saan-saan, hindi natatago, hindi natitrace. And that's why I spoke on that because sobrang importante yung public Wi-Fi project na masyadong delayed na at mali yata ang ginagawa ng executive branch.
Sir, what would be the violation if this is illegal and Artes claims that the fund was legal given the MOA signed by agencies?
That's what the MOA is one way to sugarcoat it, but the budget law, what we call General Appropriations Act, from what I know, the funds came from DICT, which is part of their budget. So whether they do a MOA or not, that in itself is illegal, transferring it. Second, I don't think it's in a charter of MMDA to do DICT-related projects. My understanding is MMDA was created for coordination with the LGUs, essentially for traffic management, road network, and waste management. That's not in the charter. So that in itself is suspicious, and that's basically what I said.
Mm-hmm. Sir, well, following up on Gretchen's question, what kind of a law or what kind of charges could be filed, if at all?
Well, that's what I want to call them to Congress, to the right committee. Give them a chance to explain. Give us details. Give us copies of the documents related to this. And then let's talk about if there's any violations, and that's up to the Ombudsman, COA, or DOJ to file the necessary charges. But normally, when you use funds not intended for another purpose and you use it for another one, it's what we call technical malversation.
All right, maraming salamat po for your time and insights. We have on the line Congressman Paul Daza. Meanwhile, the Philippines has sent a note verbal to China after the Chinese Coast Guard supposedly took by force a floating object retrieved by the Philippine Navy near Pag-asa Island. Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo said the move seeks to clarify what transpired over the weekend. Earlier this week, the Philippine Navy said Chinese Coast Guard used force in retrieving the unidentified floating object from them. Beijing has since denied this, saying it was handed over after friendly negotiations. The note verbal was issued and delivered upon the instruction of President Bongbong Marcos.
And that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, The Philippine Star, and Business World Online. You may also log on to onenews.ph for more in-depth analysis. I'm Ed Lingao.
The big story is also available via Signal Play app. Make a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. I'm Gretchen Ho. Stay safe, Philippines.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.